Jake moves into a quiet suburban neighborhood with dreams of finally having a peaceful life. After years of living in a noisy city, he is excited to settle down in a place where he can relax, enjoy his backyard, and not worry about constant chaos. But what Jake does not know is that this neighborhood has a hidden menace, and her name is Karen, the self appointed president of the HOA, with an obsession for rules and a thirst for control. From the very first day, Jake notices something strange about her. She stands on her porch, clipboard in hand, watching his every move, her sharp eyes scanning for anything that might violate the precious 8-hour guidelines. At first, Jake tries to ignore her, thinking she is just a harmless busybody, but it quickly becomes clear that Karen takes her position as HOA president very seriously, too seriously. Within days of moving in, Jake receives his first violation notice, a neatly typed letter informing him that his trash cans were left out for 20 minutes past the designated pickup time. Confused and slightly annoyed, Jake shrugs it off, thinking it must be a mistake. But the violations keep coming one after another, each more ridiculous than the last. His lawn is 2 inches too tall, his mailbox is the wrong shade of beige, his car is parked too close to the curb. Every time he tries to reason with her, she responds the same way: rules are rules. Jake is not the type to back down. He refuses to let a power-hungry neighbor control his every move, especially when the rules themselves seem absurd. But his defiance only makes Karen more determined to break in. She steps up her harassment, taking pictures of his property at all hours of the day and night, sending threatening emails, and even reporting him to the HOA board for fabricated infractions. No matter how hard Jake tries to live peacefully, Karen always finds something new to complain about, and it is clear to everyone in the neighborhood that she will not stop until she gets what she wants. The final straw comes when Jake hangs a string of lights in his backyard, a simple gesture to make his new home feel warm and inviting. Within hours, Karen storms onto his property, her face red with fury. Those lights are a violation of Section 14, Paragraph 3. She snaps, jabbing her finger at the HOA handbook. Jake laughs, shaking his head, and tells her flatly that the lights are staying. He refuses to let her dictate how he enjoys his own home. But Karen is not the type to take no for an answer, and her eyes burn with rage as she vows to make him regret his defiance. The neighborhood watches in quiet curiosity as the battle between Jake and Karen escalates. Most of them have experienced her tyranny firsthand, but they are too afraid to speak out, fearing fines, threats, or worse. But Jake is different. He does not care about her threats. He knows his rights, and he is ready to fight for them. What neither of them realizes, however, is that their feud is about to take a turn no one could have predicted, and when Karen decides to take things into her own hands, she sets off a chain reaction that will leave the entire neighborhood in chaos. One evening, as Jake relaxes in his backyard under the soft glow of the string lights, Karen hatches a plan that she believes will finally teach him a lesson. She has discovered something while snooping around his property: an old power line running to his backyard shed, and in her mind, this is the perfect excuse to strike. Believing it to be an unapproved and illegal power connection, she hires a handyman to cut the line without bothering to check where it leads or the consequences of her actions. She pays him in cash under the table, instructing him to do the job quietly and quickly. The next day, as Jake works inside his home, completely unaware of what is happening, the handyman arrives and starts cutting. But Karen has made a terrible mistake, and what she thinks is a harmless shed power line is actually connected to the main junction box that supplies power to the entire block. And the moment the line is severed, the whole neighborhood plunges into darkness. The moment the lights go out, the stillness of the neighborhood is shattered by the sound of confusion and chaos. Neighbors stumble out of their homes, blinking into the darkness, trying to figure out what happened. The street lights flicker, then die completely, and the hum of the power grid goes silent. A few houses further down the block, people start to panic. Their refrigerators and freezers stop humming, and the air conditioning systems that had been keeping them cool during the sweltering summer heat come to an abrupt halt. Mothers scramble to grab flashlights, while others pull out their phones, trying to see if they can get any information, but the network is spotty. The blackout is complete. Jake steps outside and is immediately met by the frantic faces of his neighbors who are calling each other in confusion. The street is filled with voices asking if anyone knows what happened. No one knows where the fault lies. People are checking their fuse boxes looking for a reason why their homes have no power. Jake walks to the end of his driveway where he sees Karen standing with a look of exaggerated concern on her face. She is pretending to be just as bewildered as everyone else. But Jake knows better. He feels a chill run through him as he glances over at her house and notices her smug expression barely hidden behind her facade. Before Jake can speak, Karen steps forward with her hands raised as if trying to calm everyone down. She claims she called the power company immediately upon noticing the outage and that she is doing everything she can to get to the bottom of it. But Jake can see the panic in her eyes. It is the same panic he felt the moment he realized the lights had gone out. He knew something was wrong. And the more he thought about it, the more it seemed that Karen was the one who had triggered the disaster. She had been so determined to force him into submission that she had not even thought about the consequences of cutting that power line. He decides to investigate further, walking to the back of his house where the shed is located. His heart races as he reaches the spot where the power line used to run, and there it is, the severed wire hanging loosely from the junction box, now disconnected. He understands immediately that this was not some accident, this was sabotage. Someone had deliberately cut the line, and in that moment, he realizes it was Karen. Jake rushes back to the front of his house and confronts Karen, demanding to know what she did. Karen feigns innocence and says she had no idea what could have caused the outage. She starts to ramble about how the power company would be able to fix everything soon, but Jake is not buying it. He is too sharp to fall for her act, and as his neighbors start to gather around, they too begin to piece together the clues. It does not take long for them to realize that Karen had been the one to cause the outage. A few minutes later, the power company arrives on scene and starts assessing the situation. It is clear from their responses that they are not happy about the situation. They quickly confirm that the power disruption was not caused by a natural event like a storm or an accident. Instead, it was a result of tampering. The technician starts asking questions and immediately points out that the line that was cut led directly to the neighborhood's main power supply. Jake watches as the technician's expression hardens. When he hears the details, Karen stands nearby trying to act concerned, but it is clear that the technicians are starting to look at her with suspicion. Karen's demeanor begins to crack as the reality of what has happened settles in. She tries to explain that it was an innocent mistake and that she had only wanted to address what she thought was an illegal power hookup. But her excuses fall flat. The technicians are no longer listening to her and instead are focused on making sure the rest of the neighborhood gets their power back on. Jake watches the scene unfold and feels his anger rising. Karen is no longer the queen of the neighborhood. She is a woman on the edge, desperate to hold on to her power at all costs, but the damage has been done. Jake makes the decision to take action. He knows that this cannot go unpunished, and he feels a strong sense of responsibility to his neighbors to ensure that Karen's reign of terror is over for good. He files a complaint with the power company and begins to gather evidence for what will soon become a legal battle. He refuses to let Karen get away with this, but what he does not realize is just how far this conflict is about to escalate and how much deeper Karen's obsession with control runs. The next morning, the neighborhood is still without power, and Jake knows the longer the blackout lasts, the more serious the consequences will be. Neighbors are starting to get restless. Their food spoils in the heat, their kids struggle without air conditioning, and everyone is growing more agitated. The air is thick with frustration and suspicion as everyone starts looking at each other with distrust, trying to figure out who to blame. Karen continues to play the role of the concerned neighbor, offering empty assurances and making phone calls that seem to lead nowhere, but Jake knows she is lying, and he's had enough. Jake gathers a few of the more outspoken neighbors, and they begin to discuss their options. They all agree that this situation can't go on any longer, and they need to take action. Karen had been a source of frustration for them all for years. Her constant interference and petty enforcement of HOA rules had already caused enough tension, but now she has gone too far. Jake pulls out his phone and starts to do some research. He finds a number for the power company and calls them directly, asking for more details on what caused the outage. When they finally get back to him, they confirm his suspicion. It wasn't an accident at all, someone had deliberately cut the power line. Jake feels a mix of rage and disbelief, but the more he hears, the more certain he becomes that Karen is behind it all. He explains to the technician the events of the previous day, the power line, the handyman, the blatant tampering with the main junction box. The technician takes down the details and promises to send someone out to investigate further. Jake knows this is the first step in what will likely be a long legal battle, but he is prepared to take it all the way. Later that day, the power company technician arrives at the scene and begins to assess the situation. He checks the power lines carefully and then starts to ask Karen a series of pointed questions. At first, she tries to remain composed, but it becomes clear that the technician isn't buying her story. He knows something is off. When he asks her about the handyman, she hesitates and then gives a vague answer, claiming she hired someone to help with some small repairs. But the technician isn't fooled. He presses her further about the power lines and why they were cut without any notice. Jake watches from the sidelines as the tension rises. Karen becomes more defensive and starts to change her story, claiming that she was just trying to help the community and make sure the neighborhood was safe. But the technician interrupts her, his tone sharp, as he tells her that cutting power lines without authorization is not only reckless, it is illegal. Jake steps forward and calmly adds that he knows the truth. He tells the technician about the handyman and how Karen had hired him to cut the lines without consulting anyone. Karen's face turns red with fury, but she says nothing. She can see that the jig is up, and the realization that she has been caught in her own web is dawning on her. She tries to argue that she had done nothing wrong, but her words ring hollow. The damage has already been done. Jake looks over at his neighbors. Some of them are standing behind him watching the exchange, and others are murmuring in agreement about Karen's overreach. They are all starting to see her true colors, and they are not impressed. Jake wastes no time. After the technician leaves, he calls a meeting with the neighborhood's residents, telling them everything that happened. He makes sure they understand that Karen's actions have caused harm to the entire block and that they can't let her get away with it. This time he encourages them to file complaints with the HOA and even consider taking legal action against her for the damage caused by her reckless behavior. As the days pass, Jake's words start to have an effect. Neighbors begin to rally behind him and support his efforts to hold Karen accountable. They start organizing and speaking out against her behavior. A few residents start gathering evidence and taking notes about the countless petty violations Karen had imposed on them over the years. Soon the collective frustration with Karen's reign starts to take shape into a movement, one that will eventually push back against her abusive power. But while Jake is busy organizing his neighbors, Karen is not giving up. She has a few tricks up her sleeve, and she is determined to fight back against what she sees as an attack on her authority. She begins to plot her next move, but little does she know that she is about to face a challenge that will be bigger than anything she has encountered before. And as Jake's case begins to gain momentum, Karen's position begins to unravel. The power struggle has only just begun, and the battle between them will only escalate from here. The following days drag on as the neighborhood remains without power. The frustration grows as more residents are affected by the blackout, and Karen's attempts to downplay her role in the crisis only fuel the anger of the community. People are starting to talk louder now, whispering about the damage and the chaos that Karen's reckless actions have caused, and how her once iron grip on the HOA is beginning to slip. Neighbors begin to form small groups in front of their homes. Some of them are trying to fix broken appliances, others are discussing how best to take Karen down. Jake has been busy gathering evidence to build a case against Karen. He documents the timeline of events and collects witness statements from his neighbors. Many of them have begun to open up about their own encounters with Karen's oppressive rule, her constant fines, her petty surveillance of everyone's properties, and her repeated threats of fines for the smallest of infractions. Jake reaches out to a local attorney who agrees to help him gather more evidence and prepare for a potential lawsuit against Karen. Meanwhile, Karen is becoming more and more desperate. she tries to downplay her role even more. But the neighborhood is starting to turn on her. Her earlier attempts to feign innocence now ring hollow. She tries to turn the tables by accusing Jake of overreacting and creating drama in the community. She accuses him of being the troublemaker who has caused all the unrest, but it's no use. The neighbors have seen through her facade, and they're not buying her new narrative. At a neighborhood meeting called by the HOA board, Karen tries to regain control of the situation by using her usual tactics. She insists that the power outage was an unfortunate accident and that she has done everything she can to resolve it. She tells everyone she's been in contact with the power company and assures them that everything will be fixed soon. But Jake knows better, and so do the others. No one believes her anymore. Her actions are too blatant, her lies too obvious. The HOA board members, who once feared her, are starting to question her judgment. They listen to the residents' complaints and carefully consider the evidence presented by Jake and his neighbors. The board agrees to start an investigation into Karen's actions and her handling of the power outage. They begin to question her motives and whether she had truly acted in the best interest of the community or if she had been using her position for personal gain. Karen sits there stewing in silence as the meeting continues, knowing that she has lost control of the situation and the support she once had. The next day, the power company arrives with a full crew to restore the power. It is a long and difficult process, but within hours the lights come back on across the neighborhood. The relief is palpable as people start to resume their daily lives. They are finally able to return to normalcy, but there is a lingering sense of distrust that will not go away. Karen's reputation has been damaged beyond repair, and the residents are starting to realize just how deeply she has manipulated them. Jake's case is gaining momentum. The lawyer he hired is now fully involved in the process and has begun reaching out to other homeowners who have been wronged by Karen's tactics. With every conversation, more evidence piles up against her. Neighbors start filing complaints, and the pressure mounts on Karen to face the consequences of her actions. As the investigation into Karen deepens, the HOA board begins to take a hard look at her leadership and her ability to fairly manage the community. They start to question her qualifications and whether she should remain in charge of the HOA at all. But Karen is not one to go down quietly. She digs in her heels and starts to fight back in the only way she knows how. She attempts to smear Jake's name by spreading rumors about him to the neighbors, claiming that he's the one causing all the trouble. She tries to rally support by presenting herself as a victim of a conspiracy, but her tactics fail as the community turns further against her. The situation grows even more tense as the battle between Jake and Karen reaches a boiling point. It's no longer just about a simple power outage, it's become a battle for control of the neighborhood, and Karen's grip on power is slipping fast. But she refuses to give up. She digs deeper into her attempts to manipulate the community, but the more she tries to hold on, the more she loses the trust of her neighbors, and with every passing day it becomes clearer that the end of her reign is near. Jake feels the shift in the air. He sees it in the eyes of his neighbors as they begin to rally behind him, and as Karen's defenses crumble under the pressure, he knows the fight is far from over, but he's ready for whatever comes next. And he's not backing down until Karen's rule is over for good. The investigation into Karen's actions intensifies as the HOA board starts to take the complaints seriously. They begin to scrutinize her behavior with a level of scrutiny they had never applied before. They pore over the evidence against her, witness testimonies from the neighbors, photos of her previous violations, and the damning security footage of the handyman cutting the power line. The HOA board begins to realize just how much damage Karen has caused, not only to the neighborhood's infrastructure, but also to its sense of community. Trust starts to erode as more and more people come forward with their own stories of Karen's overreaching control. The tension grows palpable at the next HOA meeting. Karen arrives early, her face tight with anger. As she looks around at the gathering of residents and board members, she can feel the eyes on her. She knows that the walls are closing in. She tries to act confident, keeping her head high, but it's clear she's rattled. She knows the investigation is not going in her favor. She can feel the community turning against her, but she is still determined to hold on to her power. Jake arrives with a few of his neighbors and takes a seat in the back of the room. He can already tell that this is the moment when everything is going to come to a head. He watches as Karen fidgets with her papers. Nervously, she's trying to put on a calm front, but it's failing, the cracks are showing, and it's only a matter of time before everything falls apart. The board calls the meeting to order, and the atmosphere is tense. Karen is called up to speak first, and she stands with a false smile plastered across her face. She starts to explain the power outage again, making it sound like an unfortunate accident, one she had nothing to do with. She insists that the handyman was just hired for a minor repair and that she was unaware of the full scope of the damage at first. The board seems to buy her story, but then Jake stands up and interrupts her calmly and clearly stating that he knows the truth about what happened. He outlines the timeline of events, the handyman, the severed power line, the aftermath, and how everything points directly to her. Karen's smile falters, and for the first time her facade slips. The board members look at each other with skepticism, and Jake continues to lay out the facts. He presents the evidence, the photos of Karen's previous violations, her emails demanding compliance from residents, and most damning of all, the footage of her watching from her window as the handyman cut the power line. Karen stammers, trying to defend herself, but it's clear the damage has already been done. One of the board members speaks up, asking Karen if she has anything to say in her defense, but she remains silent for a long moment. She tries to compose herself, but her voice shakes as she tells them that she never meant for any of this to happen. She claims that she was just trying to make sure the neighborhood stayed in line, and that Jake's refusal to follow the rules had pushed her to act. She tries to spin her actions into a desperate attempt to keep things under control, but no one is buying it. The board listens patiently, but it's clear they've already made their decision. After a brief deliberation, the board announces that Karen will be removed from her position as president effective immediately. She is no longer in charge of the HOA and will be banned from holding any future leadership positions. They tell her that the community has lost trust in her and that her actions have caused irreparable damage. Karen stands there, frozen in shock. She can't believe what is happening. This was not the way she thought things would go. She had expected to be hailed as the savior of the neighborhood, not dragged through the mud and stripped of all her power. The room is silent for a moment before the neighbors begin to murmur. Some of them are nodding in approval, others look relieved, as though a great weight has been lifted from their shoulders. Karen's grip on the community has shattered, and there is no turning back. Jake watches as the board hands down its decision and feels a sense of triumph. But he knows that the battle is not over yet. Karen might be gone from the HOA, but there are still the legal matters to address, and he won't rest until she is held accountable for everything she's done. Karen's face turns crimson as the reality sinks in. She starts to shout and protest, but her words fall on deaf ears. She tries to argue that she's being treated unfairly, but the board cuts her off and tells her that it's too late for excuses. As the meeting concludes, Karen is escorted out of the room, and Jake watches her storm off into the distance. The neighborhood has been freed from her reign of terror, but the damage she has caused will take time to heal. Jake knows that he has won this battle, but he remains focused. He'll continue to fight for justice for his neighbors and ensure that Karen's actions are fully exposed for what they were. And while Karen may have lost her position of power, Jake is certain that this is just the beginning of her downfall. Her empire is crumbling, and nothing will ever be the same for her again. The days after Karen's removal from the HOA board are filled with a strange mix of relief and tension. The neighborhood seems lighter without her presence. The residents begin to speak freely again, sharing their frustrations and their experiences with her rule. They begin to rebuild the sense of community that Karen had tried to dismantle for so long. People start offering help to each other again. Their lawns are mowed together, kids are playing in the streets, and the air seems less thick with suspicion and fear. Jake watches this transformation unfold, and he feels a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing he was a catalyst for this change. But he knows that Karen's grip on the neighborhood may have loosened, but her desire for control has not disappeared. Karen's actions have left a mark on the community, and Jake can feel the aftereffects as he walks through the neighborhood. there is still a sense of caution in the air as people try to process everything that has happened. The trust that once bound them together has been shattered, and it will take time to rebuild that. But Jake is hopeful. He knows that the worst is over, and that the power that Karen once held over them has been broken. Jake continues to work with his lawyer on the legal side of things. They've gathered a mountain of evidence from the investigation and from Karen's own actions, and they're moving forward with a lawsuit against her for the damages caused by the power outage and for the emotional toll her actions have taken on the neighborhood. Jake's neighbors support him fully, and many of them agree to join the lawsuit as plaintiffs. They're tired of living in fear, and they want to see Karen held accountable for her reckless behavior. Karen, on the other hand, is spiraling. She has never been one to accept defeat, and the humiliation of being removed from the HOA board has hit her hard. She spends her days at home pacing back and forth, her thoughts racing as she tries to figure out how to turn things around. She can't believe that after all the years she spent controlling the neighborhood, one mistake has led to this public humiliation. She begins to plot her next move, but deep down she knows she's running out of options. She hires a new lawyer to help her with the impending lawsuit, but even with the best legal team money can buy, she knows the evidence against her is overwhelming. Karen tries to spin the situation into a victim narrative, telling anyone who will listen that she was just trying to protect the neighborhood and that Jake is the real troublemaker. She tells people that the whole ordeal is a setup and that everyone is out to get her, but the people who once feared her are no longer buying her stories. Meanwhile, Jake and his neighbors are focused on moving forward. They're determined to keep pushing the lawsuit, and they know they have the support of the entire neighborhood behind them. They have seen how strong they can be when they work together, and they're not about to let Karen's lies or manipulation tear them apart. Jake begins to speak out at neighborhood meetings, urging everyone to stay united and to stand firm in their pursuit of justice. They all agree that Karen must be held accountable for the damage she's caused, and that they will not rest until she's made to face the consequences. Karen's situation grows more desperate with each passing day. The media begins to take notice of her downfall as news outlets catch wind of the legal battle, and the story of her reign of terror spreads through local news channels. Karen's face is splashed across headlines, and her reputation takes another hit. She becomes the subject of ridicule and mockery. As more people hear about her manipulative tactics and petty behavior, the community she once controlled now sees her as a villain, a cautionary tale of what happens when power is abused. Jake takes comfort in knowing that his neighborhood is no longer under her thumb, but he also knows that there's a long road ahead. They've won a battle, but the war is far from over. Karen is not one to back down easily, and he braces himself for whatever she might do next. But for now, the neighborhood is moving on. They are healing and reclaiming their sense of unity, and they know that the strength they found in each other will carry them through whatever challenges come next. As the legal case progresses, Jake and his neighbors stay focused. They know that they're fighting not just for themselves, but for the future of their community, and they will not let Karen's actions go unpunished. The pressure on Karen continues to mount, and with every passing day her world crumbles a little more. Her attempts to salvage her reputation become more desperate, and in the end she finds herself isolated without the power she once had. The neighborhood has turned its back on her, and the empire she built through manipulation and fear is falling apart piece by piece. As the days pass, Karen's attempts to regain control become more frantic. She tries reaching out to former allies within the neighborhood, those few who once supported her, but they've all distanced themselves from her. She finds herself alone with only her lawyer to help her navigate the legal storm she faces. The lawsuit continues to gain traction as more neighbors join in, and with every new complaint her case becomes weaker and weaker. Her defense grows more desperate and her words less convincing. Jake watches from the sidelines with a quiet sense of satisfaction as Karen's world continues to unravel. The courtroom battles are long and exhausting, but with each session Karen finds herself losing more ground. The evidence is overwhelming and her story is full of holes. Her credibility is short, and her once ironclad reputation is now a source of ridicule. The power she had once wielded with such ease is slipping through her fingers, and she can do nothing to stop it. The neighborhood begins to heal, but there are still scars from the damage Karen caused. Neighbors are more vigilant now. They keep an eye on each other and work together to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. But the sense of unity is strong and growing every day as people work to rebuild the community that Karen had once torn apart. Jake knows that their fight is not just about winning in court, it's about reclaiming the spirit of togetherness that had been lost under Karen's rule, and he feels a deep sense of pride in how far they've come. Karen, however, refuses to let go of her past power. She continues to scheme, trying to undermine Jake at every turn, but her efforts are in vain. Each time she attempts to sabotage his efforts, her plans backfire spectacularly. She tries to rally support from other neighborhoods, but her reputation precedes her, and people quickly turn their backs on her. She's left with nothing but her own bitterness and the growing realization that the community she once controlled is no longer under her thumb. As the lawsuit progresses, Jake and his neighbors begin to prepare for the final showdown. They've all invested so much time and energy into this fight, and they're determined to see it through to the end. The lawyers are more confident now that Karen's case is falling apart. They know that the jury will see the truth and that Karen will be held accountable for her actions. Jake feels a deep sense of hope that justice will finally be served, but he's also cautious. He knows that Karen won't give up easily, and he prepares himself for whatever final desperate move she might try. In the meantime, the neighborhood continues to grow stronger. They host community events to celebrate their newfound freedom from Karen's reign. They organize block parties and barbecues and spend time getting to know each other again. Jake watches as people smile and laugh together, something that had seemed impossible just months before. It's clear that the neighborhood is on the mend, and that the community spirit that Karen had tried so hard to destroy is now stronger than ever. As the day of the trial approaches, the tension rises. The courtroom is filled with anticipation as both sides prepare to make their final arguments. Jake sits beside his lawyer, feeling the weight of the moment, but also a quiet confidence that the truth will prevail. Karen walks in with her head held high, trying to project an air of superiority, but it's obvious to everyone that her facade is crumbling. Her lawyer looks tired and defeated. The pressure of the case is wearing on them both. The trial begins, and Jake watches as the attorneys present their closing statements. The evidence is clear and damning, and Karen's defense is weak and full of contradictions. Her previous actions are laid bare for all to see. The jury listens carefully, and the tension in the room is thick as everyone waits for the final verdict. Jake feels a knot in his stomach, but he knows that justice is on their side and that it's only a matter of time before Karen's lies are exposed for the world to see. As the jury deliberates, Jake's mind races back to everything that led to this moment: the power outage, the lies, the manipulation, the destruction of trust, and the years of control that Karen had held over the neighborhood. He thinks of all the neighbors who stood beside him and how far they've come together. He knows that they've already won in so many ways, and that no matter what happens in that courtroom, they've already taken back their community. Finally, the jury returns with a verdict. The room falls silent as the judge calls for attention. The tension is unbearable, and then the verdict is read. Karen is found guilty on all counts of negligence and misconduct. She is ordered to pay restitution to the neighborhood for the damages caused by the power outage and for the emotional distress she inflicted on the residents. The jury has spoken, and Karen's reign of terror is officially over. Karen stands there in shock as the reality of the verdict sinks in. Her world crashes down around her. She's lost everything: the community, the power, the control, and now her future is uncertain. Jake can't help but feel a sense of victory. He's fought for justice and won, and the neighborhood has finally been freed from Karen's grip. The healing process can truly begin, and Jake knows that this victory will be remembered as the moment when the community came together and took back their power. In the days following the trial, Karen is a shadow of the person she once was. She no longer walks with the air of authority she used to carry everywhere. Her neighbors no longer fear her or cater to her whims. They watch from a distance as she tries to make sense of her loss. But the truth has settled in, and there is no escape from the consequences of her actions. Karen's reputation is in tatters, and no amount of spin or manipulation can change the fact that she is seen as the villain in this story. Jake watches all of this unfold with a sense of calm. He's seen the toll this battle has taken on the neighborhood and on Karen, but he knows the road to true healing is just beginning. There are still a lot of wounds to mend. Trust has to be rebuilt, and the sense of community that was once shattered needs to be restored. But the foundation has been laid. The neighborhood is stronger now than it has been in years. As the months pass, the neighborhood slowly starts to return to its old rhythm. Neighbors help each other out again. They work together to make improvements. They've been holding town hall meetings to discuss how to move forward without the looming presence of Karen's oppressive rule. There is a new sense of cooperation and camaraderie, and Jake feels proud to have been part of the change. The lessons learned from this battle are not forgotten, and every time they come together to address an issue, there is a renewed sense of unity. Meanwhile, Karen retreats further into her isolation. She is no longer part of the conversation at HOA meetings. She is not welcome in social gatherings, and her attempts to re-enter the community are met with cold silence. She can no longer use her position to get what she wants, and she finds herself at the mercy of the very people she once manipulated. She tries to reach out to a few old contacts for help, but her calls go unanswered, and the walls around her continue to close in. Jake and his neighbors begin to take the lessons learned from this struggle and apply them to ensure that something like this never happens again. They form a new committee dedicated to ensuring fairness and transparency in the neighborhood's governance. They vow to never let one person hold such power over them again, and they make it clear that everyone's voice matters. The decision-making process becomes more inclusive, and residents feel more connected than ever before. The neighborhood thrives as new relationships are formed. People who once barely spoke now check in with each other on a regular basis. They start new traditions and work on projects together, building gardens, fixing up common areas, and even organizing events to raise funds for local causes. Jake finds himself playing a key role in these efforts, helping to keep things organized and making sure that the spirit of community stays strong. Karen, meanwhile, continues to struggle with the fallout from her actions. Her financial situation worsens as the lawsuit proceeds, and she is forced to sell her property to pay off the restitution she owes the neighborhood. Her days of making threats and collecting fines are behind her, and she finds herself in the uncomfortable position of relying on the kindness of others, something she had never done in the past. She reaches out to old friends and family members, but the responses she receives are cold and distant. Jake's satisfaction grows as the months go by. Watching Karen's continued downfall serves as a reminder of the power of community. The residents of the neighborhood have reclaimed what was rightfully theirs, and they've done it without resorting to the same tactics of manipulation and control that Karen once used. They've come out on the other side stronger and more united than ever. The victory feels sweet, but Jake knows that the fight for justice is never truly over. There will always be people who seek to exploit others for their own gain, and the lessons learned from this battle need to be passed down to future generations so that they can continue to protect the values that have been restored in their community. But for now, Jake is content. He's seen the power of unity, and he knows that this is just the beginning of a new chapter for the neighborhood. As time passes, the wounds begin to heal, and life starts to return to normal. Karen becomes nothing more than a cautionary tale, a figure of ridicule in the neighborhood's history. Books. Her name is rarely spoken, but her actions are remembered and serve as a reminder of how easily power can corrupt and how important it is to stand together when faced with injustice. Jake reflects on how far the community has come and how much stronger they are now than they were before, and he's grateful for the people around him who fought with him through every step of the way. The battle may be over, but the lessons learned will last a lifetime. Jake looks to the future with hope and optimism, knowing that no matter what challenges may arise, the community will always be stronger than any one individual. The power of unity will always be their greatest weapon, and with it they will continue to build a neighborhood that is fair, just, and filled with the spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. As the years pass, the neighborhood continues to thrive, and the lessons learned from the battle against Karen remain etched in everyone's minds. Jake sees the lasting effects of their victory every day when he walks through the streets. The once fractured community has become a close knit group of people who look out for one another. They celebrate each other's successes and support each other in times of need. The unity that Karen tried so hard to destroy has been restored and strengthened with every challenge they face together. Jake takes pride in knowing that the work they did to remove Karen's influence is still paying off. Every time they gather for a neighborhood event or hold a meeting, he sees how far they've come from those dark days when fear and control ruled the streets. The transparency and fairness they fought for have become the cornerstone of how things are done now. People feel heard, their voices matter, and decisions are made collectively. There's no room for one person to take control anymore. The HOA meetings are now a place of collaboration where everyone is welcome to speak and contribute ideas. There are no longer any whispers of power plays or secret agendas, as there once were. Karen's influence has been completely eradicated, and in its place, a sense of shared responsibility has taken root. Everyone pitches in to help with community projects, and no one is above anyone else. They work side by side to ensure that the neighborhood remains a place where everyone feels safe, valued, and respected. Jake reflects on the long journey it took to get here, the countless hours spent in meetings, the legal battles, the fights for justice. It was all worth it in the end, not just because they rid themselves of Karen, but because they had reclaimed their sense of community and shared purpose. He's proud of what they accomplished, and he knows that their work will continue for years to come. Karen, meanwhile, has become a cautionary tale in the neighborhood, a figure of shame who is whispered about when the topic of power and control comes up. People who once feared her now speak about her with disdain, but Jake knows that even as time goes on, Karen's actions will never be forgotten. They will serve as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of standing together when one person seeks to undermine the collective good. Despite her continued struggles, Karen's pride and bitterness keep her from accepting the reality of her situation. She continues to try and find ways to reclaim some semblance of the power she once had, but each attempt falls flat. She's no longer able to manipulate anyone, and her isolation deepens. She's left with the consequences of her actions and the knowledge that the community she once tried to control has moved on without her. For Jake and the rest of the neighborhood, life continues to improve. They've built a new foundation, one that's stronger and more resilient than before. They take pride in knowing that their victory wasn't just about defeating Karen, but about ensuring that their neighborhood will never again fall victim to someone like her. They've created a space where everyone has a say and where the well-being of the community always comes first. Jake still participates in the neighborhood's projects, but now he does so with a sense of fulfillment, knowing that the fight for justice has created a legacy of fairness and respect. He looks around and sees neighbors working together on new initiatives, organizing social events for families, helping each other with home improvements, and supporting each other through life's challenges. It's a neighborhood built on trust and shared values, a place where people can live with peace of mind, knowing that they have each other's backs. Looking back on everything that happened, Jake is proud of how the neighborhood came together to stand up for what's right. They fought, not just for themselves, but for the future of their community, and in doing so, they made a lasting impact that will be remembered for generations to come. Their victory over Karen wasn't just a personal triumph for Jake, it was a triumph for everyone who believed in the power of unity and cooperation. As time goes on, Karen fades into the past, a relic of a time when fear ruled and control was paramount. But Jake knows that the neighborhood will always carry the lessons learned from that experience and will continue to stand strong together, no matter what challenges come their way. They've proven that when a community unites, there is nothing that can tear them apart.